And I'm joined by George Cadman, a lawyer with Boughton Law, specializing in corporate securities and real estate civil litigation. Best of the season. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Gord.
Let's talk a little bit about some economic and legal affairs that may affect our listener. The provincial government has changed the Societies Act, and that kicks in, later in the new year, in the fall, actually?
The sequence was this. The legislature approved the new statute in the spring session. It's long awaited, frankly. We've worked through white papers, and it's now in place. But they had held off enacting it, bringing it into force. That order in council was passed about 2 weeks ago. It will come into force on the 28th of November, 2016.
So this affects probably more organizations than we think,
right,
because there's more kicking around.
Absolutely. Anybody in the not-for-profit sector that is incorporated as a society provincially, housing societies, not-for-profit outreach societies, for example, a lot of community care outreach facilities, entities like North Shore Connections, for example,
right,
that works in the disability space.
Okay, so let's talk. You mentioned that it's been a long time coming. They're updating the regs. What does this mean to me? I'm involved in a small society. What does it mean? More paperwork, less paperwork? What's it going to mean?
I think, two things. First of all, there's a 2-year transition period. It will phase out the old constitution and bylaws under the old statute, bring in new requirements around governance. It will bring in new, particularly for societies that have a large number of members, it will bring in new financial reporting requirements. It codifies directors' obligations and liabilities, the role of auditors. It brings it into line with what I would call the for-profit statute, the Business Corporations Act.
Because some are very small.
Yes.
And some are very big.
Yes.
So it won't be onerous if I'm a small one?
No, for those that are small, first of all, you've got a 2-year transition period to look at it, and secondly, it will not materially change. But for the larger not-for-profits, where they have a large number of members, they are reporting annually on their finances. There may be foundations out there that are incorporated as societies, for example.
Which may be dealing with a lot of money.
This will essentially bring them into line with the requirements for for-profit operations in terms of financial reporting, directors' liability, fiduciary obligations, all of those things.
Does it make it easier when directors of these societies go to a lawyer or go to an accountant and say, okay, I'm either setting up or I've got to make a change? Does it make it the advice they're going to get is more consistent?
I think it will be a lot. The new act clarifies a lot of what were vague areas under the old act, and so this will be a better code to work with.
Okay, let's talk about some federal initiatives, emerging issues for the impact on BC businesses in the coming year, 2016. You've got down here investments in transportation and infrastructure. So the feds are going to spend a bunch of money in transportation and infrastructure. Why does a business need to be aware of that unless I'm an engineering firm or a construction firm and I have a chance to make some money?
I think it impacts, particularly in this specific gateway city where we live. It impacts across.
You mean gateway to Asia?
Gateway to Asia.
Right.
It impacts all the way across. As you know, the former government had the Asia-Pacific Gateway Initiative. We have seen some infrastructure improvements for goods movement. The commitment it was unclear. So shortest speech from the throne in Canadian parliamentary history.
Which is not a bad thing.
Which is not a bad thing. Lacking in details, but some very specific commitments to move ahead with infrastructure. And that translates not only for the construction industry, it translates for the professions, obviously, but it also translates for transportation, goods movement, in and from the port, in and to the airport, all of those kinds of things.
So if you're in that business, pay attention because you are going to get more details in the coming year.
Absolutely.
And changes are coming.
And it's a question of how they're going to finance that and where the tax burden will be.
Good Tuesday morning to you. Gord McDonald in for John McComb, the John McComb Show on CKNW News Talk 980. Joined in studio by George Cadman. He's with Boughton Law, the law firm that specializes in corporate securities and real estate civil litigation. We're talking about some trends to keep an eye on in the coming new year, especially if you are in business, you work for a business. George, we were talking about some federal initiatives and emerging issues that may affect businesses in British Columbia in 2016. This renewed relationship, the federal government of Justin Trudeau leading the way with First Nations. Huge issue. We've been talking about for years that the instability or the fact it's our relationship with First Nations, with land, resource sector is unclear. Let's talk about clean technology. Is that an area you think is going to move forward? First Nations, clean technology, federal government, and BC business.
Yeah. So first of all, on the First Nations piece, when we look at the speech from the throne, one key line that Indigenous people will be given a larger opportunity to consult and deal with major resource development projects.
Translated a bigger chunk of the pie. Probably?
That's quite possible. Certainly, not that business isn't already addressing that, but I think it's realistic to think that's out there. The other piece, clean technology, Gord, what's going to be interesting is to watch the dynamic between what was approved in Paris in this week, how that translates for Canadian business, particularly for business in this province, where we saw the Premier make a very specific announcement around technology businesses earlier this month. We have clean technology that's being exported now. If you put the word export around that kind of knowledge being translated and taken abroad. The effect of the Paris Accord may well be to provide great opportunities for Canadian clean tech business. And the question is, how much of the $100 billion that has been committed worldwide will be available both in this country for development of those opportunities? And what will it mean in terms of sustainability practices for Canadian business? So a lot to come on that, I think.
Nuts and bolts question. Are we going to get an environmental review process for resource projects, which, of course, is much of what we do in British Columbia, that gets past some of the past controversies? The province is doing this, the feds are doing that, Native groups hate this, groups who have been screaming about the pipeline proposals and the National Energy Board. We're going to get somewhere where there's everybody agrees on this is how we do an environmental review, or is that Pollyanna?
I hope we will. The speech from the throne made a specific reference to looking at the environmental review process for major projects, but it was lacking in details. So we have a federal legislative session that will be coming up beginning towards the end of January. It will need to be on that agenda somewhere.
And we've got the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that huge trade deal. Is it dead under the Liberals? Is it going to? I think Justin Trudeau left himself some wiggle room there, didn't he?
He certainly left himself some wiggle room, but yet again, in the speech from the throne, a commitment to look at the opportunities that those trade agreements, both CETA, the European Agreement, and TPP, make available to Canadian business. So I don't have a sense that it's gone by the boards. I do think, quite rightly, as a new government, they have said we want to stand back and take a look at this and make sure it works.
See which sector screams the loudest.
Exactly right.
Somebody wins and somebody loses.
Exactly right.
Let's talk about budget approach. So the feds are going to deficit financing for the next few years at least. British Columbia, the BC Liberals, stay pretty committed to balanced budgets. Does that have much of an impact on business out here?
I think if you are in business in British Columbia, one, you should be pleased that we're going to have a balanced budget provincially. Two, there is only one taxpayer, and at all levels of government, municipal, federal, provincial. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch what they do with the business tax rates as they move forward. And certainly we've heard municipalities looking at development costs, all of those kinds of things. So we've got a lot of interesting times ahead of us in the next year,
and lots of work for your business.
Well, I hate to say that, but yes.
George, as always, thank you. Best of the season to you
and to you, Gord.